Director Zack Snyder has announced that the sequel to Man of Steel will involve Batman and Superman squaring down. It will be basically a crossover movie. It will introduce a new Batman, and it will be another stepping stone to what they hope will eventually be a Justice League movie. And they've reportedly taken inspiration from Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns in planning out the struggle between these two superheroes. It's the cast from Man of Steel is expected to return. Is the same writer? Oh, good. It is the same writer. David S. Goyer, the schmuck who gave us Ghost Rider 2. Granted, he did have a writing credit in the Dark Knight trilogy, but that was story. And even if he did have some contributions to the script, it was obviously overwritten by Christopher Nolan and Jonathan Nolan. So yeah, he and Zack Snyder will co-write the story, and David S. Goyer, who wrote the first Man of Steel, will also write the sequel, apparently. It's probably no secret that I didn't really like Man of Steel. And I know there are legions of Superman and Christopher Nolan fanboys who are coming out of the woodwork and defending this movie like the Holy Bible, praising Zack Snyder for giving them very over-the-top Superman action scenes, and how they like the dark tone of it, blah blah blah. First of all, Zack Snyder has never made a good movie. Watchmen was probably his best, but even then, that got kind of a mixed response. That was strictly aimed at fans of the comic book. But Zack Snyder, director of such masterpieces as 300, Sucker Punch, and he and I love Christopher Nolan. Christopher Nolan is easily one of the best directors of our time, but Man of Steel was not his movie. It was Zack Snyder's movie. Christopher Nolan did have story input, but he didn't write the script. And basically his only involvement was as producer and co-writing the story. That's it. I have no guilt whatsoever about trashing Man of Steel because Christopher Nolan was relative to a lot of other people in the movie, was barely involved. And even if he was involved, it is his worst movie. Just because he is an excellent director does not mean he cannot have a bad movie. He has not directed a bad movie yet, but Man of Steel was and remains, at least at this point, at nearing the end of July, the most disappointing movie of the year for me. Which I shouldn't have gotten my expectations that high, because it's directed by Zack Snyder. But the characters in that were just archetypes. They were just bland, lifeless archetypes of the actual characters from Superman. I mean, Henry Cavill, he's a good actor, but he was just playing this angsty, brooding guy who suddenly turns into this violent maniac who, in a red cape, who trashes Metropolis fighting General Zod. Michael Shannon was just chewing on all kinds of scenery. He was miscast as Zod. I mean, he should not have been General Zod. He's not really scary, and he sounded like Jon Favreau. Because when I think of intimidating voices, I think of Jon Favreau. So he was there. Amy Adams was just forgettable. I don't even know why she was there, but she was just again, she was bland, and she only said really cliched, boring things that the writer would think that Lois Lane would say, having no experience in watching any other version of Lois Lane. I mean, Lois Lane, you can maintain the core characteristics in the comic book, but if you're making a movie, you have to bring something beyond that. I mean, you have to add some kind of dynamic to her character. You have to make her character an actual character and not just an archetype. And a very joyless archetype at that, because just because something is an archetype does not mean it cannot be enjoyable. I mean, Pacific Rim was full of archetypes, and that movie was awesome. That movie was a lot of fun. It wasn't great, but the archetypal characters served the story relatively well. I mean, they were fairly likable. They didn't have to be deep. It's giant robots versus giant aliens. But for something like Superman, where the characters are one of the biggest parts, I think you need to have something a bit more than archetypes. And if you are doing archetypes, you better make them likable. These archetypes were just so dull. And a lot of the characters were just unnecessary. They were there just because they were in other Superman movies, like Lawrence Fishburne as Perry White. Okay, I don't mind casting Lawrence Fishburne as Perry White, but he didn't do anything. He should have been written out. So should Christopher Maloney have been written out. I mean, he didn't do anything either, or at least nothing of substance. I mean, all he did was he killed the Ursa chick, Zod's girlfriend chick. But again, she didn't do anything. She didn't have any personality. And the action scenes, as good as they were, completely went against the character of Superman. I mean, he had no problem just trashing every single thing in his path. I mean, he had no problem just completely reducing Metropolis to rubble. Which that was kind of a funny image when he and Lois Lane kissed amongst the rubble. So the The only character I thought they actually added something for was Jor-El, and that was minimal. But if you made a Superman movie as poorly as these schmucks did, then I don't think it really calls for a sequel, no matter how much money it makes, because if you're going to do a sequel, don't hire the same writer or director. But Warner Brothers and whoever is in charge up at the top is so eager to match the dollars that Marvel is making for its Avengers movies. I mean, that it does not care to take any time to properly establish any of its characters. I mean, the Avengers was a stupid movie, yeah, but it was a lot of fun, and you actually had these characters established. I mean, and even if you didn't, the Avengers provided plenty of personality for them and provided just enough backstory to where you generally knew what these guys were about. But yeah, one of the Avengers was Iron Man, so you had 2 Iron Man movies before Avengers. One of the Avengers was Thor, so you had a Thor movie. You had a Captain America movie. You had a Hulk movie, or the Incredible Hulk. But you had all this. And with after one crappy Superman movie, you were ready to go. You were ready to expand your roster. And they're talking about introducing a new Batman. I don't want to see a new Batman, at least not this early. I mean, Dark Knight Rises came out last year. I mean, Batman has been done astoundingly well in the Dark Knight trilogy. I mean, all 3 of those movies are great movies. They're not even great comic book movies. They're just great movies. I mean, they are such a good character study for this guy. And you had this all-star cast. You had these memorable, really kind of modern epic stories centered around Batman. I mean, they were the best Batman films to date, in my opinion. I mean, they were better than the Tim Burton and Joel Schumacher Batman movies, which seemed kind of self-indulgent and comic booky and kind of limited by the times. I mean, did you get a lot of the really stiff movements of Keaton? But anyway, you had. I don't want to see another Batman because it's just going to be a downgrade, probably. I mean, and introducing a new Batman in the midst of a Superman sequel is just a really asinine move. I mean, it's like instead of making an entire movie about Thor, you just inserted Thor into an Iron Man sequel, and we're like, okay, well, that's all we need to do for that character. Granted, that's what they did for Black Widow, but Black Widow sucked, especially with Scarlett Johansson playing her. But you had this. I just spit on my glasses. You had this. Personally, I don't support another Batman, especially this early. But if you really want to have another Batman and have him be memorable, have him be different than the other Batmans, my top 3 choices are Carl Urban, Joaquin Phoenix, and Eric Bana. one of those guys should be Batman. I mean, Carl Urban has actually already proven that he can wear a mask pretty well. I mean, he wore the Judge Dredd helmet all right. But I don't know. Is he going to do his Clint Eastwood voice? I mean, he did a Clint Eastwood voice for the entirety of the remake of Judge Dredd. That's a movie that's a better movie right there. Dredd was really cool. It bombed, but it was really cool. I mean, it was a really good Dredd movie. So, sorry, people are upstairs walking around. I'm kind of distracted. But as for the whole fight between Batman and Superman, what's probably going to end up being the case, and to be fair, this was the case with a lot of the conflicts in the Avengers. They're only going to have the characters fight just for the sake of having the characters fight, because fanboys and general audiences will find it cool, like Batman and Superman are fighting. I mean, it's like that little fight that they did in Avengers with Iron Man and Thor. They really had no concrete reason to fight. I mean, they fought because it made for a cool action scene. That's it. But they're doing this thing where at Comic-Con they quoted the line where from Dark Knight Returns, where Batman is like, "I want you to remember who beat you," which might be kind of funny, like Superman gets his butt whooped in his own movie by Batman. But I don't know what we should do. I mean, I think the move to do right now is get a new director. I mean, obviously this is not going to happen because they are too concerned with making money. They're too concerned with getting this movie out as quick as possible. They want to get that Justice League movie out there. But if I was one of the executives in charge of creative decisions, I would greenlight? I would greenlight a Man of Steel sequel with a different director, a different writer, and make it more colorful.